Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. Interest in these disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped millions of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast.
Hello, listeners. Today, we're doing something a little different. We are talking to Audrey of Taxidermy, which is a Melbourne-based taxidermist who I met at the Halloween Dark Moon Fair, which is a curiosities and oddities exhibition put on by Flying Bats Emporium in Coburg, Victoria. I was immediately drawn to your table at the fair because you had a human vertebral column on it. And I love vertebrae. I did my master's thesis on asymmetry in scoliosis in vertebrae. And we had a really good conversation. I wanted to share what you do with our listeners because I don't know, we hit it off and you're just awesome. And I love the work you do. So I'm going to fangirl. I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity and your platform for, I guess, allowing me to talk about something I really love and am passionate about. And I'm really excited to be sharing with you and your listeners all the nitty-gritty details.
Yay, and that's what we love. It's a podcast about morbid history for the most part, but I also like to go into detail on the medical procedures and taxidermy. It is kind of a large medical procedure, but also it's artistic as well. So, well, let's dive right in. How did you get your start as a taxidermist?
So, you know how like when COVID started, heaps of people, started making like sourdough and banana bread?
Mm-hmm.
I guess getting into taxidermy or rather like entomology art at that point in time was my sourdough and banana bread.
That's awesome.
It's a bit of a long story, but I feel like a lot of context is needed to properly tell you guys about how like I got here. There's a lot of history behind it, I guess. I might start with the first memory of taxidermy that I ever had, which was at my paternal grandmother's house. She used to have these cabinets and cabinets of like knickknacks, little dolls, ceramic animals, and just like things that she and her friends would make out of like different materials. And I was probably I'm going to say about 10 at the time when I sort of walked past one of these like low cabinets that housed like a diorama of a farm. And in the corner that was closest to me was like a pond, and it had like ceramic lily pads, lotus flowers, frogs, and fishes. And like in the middle of it all was a little duckling. I didn't know at the time, but it was a taxidermy duckling. And I was very compelled to like reach out to pet it. But I remember my mom like swiftly like swatting my hand away, and she was like, "Don't touch that. It's made of a real duckling and that's an animal, could have diseases and stuff like that." But I was very fascinated, and I couldn't stop thinking about like what she meant by that it was made of a real duckling. And then fast forward to when I was in my late teens, I had adopted a Syrian hamster. And I guess for the people who don't know what a Syrian hamster is, it's like, I think one of the biggest hamsters available as pets, and they basically look like little like young guinea pigs. Like they're huge.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah, that's right. And I know this sounds so silly because I guess the literature denies that hamsters are smart enough, but we really bonded and we really had a connection. But hamsters don't really have long lifespans. So she passed away at the age of about 3. And, I just couldn't let her go because of the bond we had. And I wanted more time than we were allowed. And I started researching into animal preservation methods and came across taxidermy again. And believe it or not, I had called up like every single museum where I grew up and was just sobbing over the phone and begging like for someone to help me taxidermy my pet hamster.
Oh,
And like just a little bit of a background, I grew up in Singapore, and at the time, no one was doing like commercial taxidermy. And I think that would have been because it's quite a taboo subject, and also due to like cultural belief. But even till today, I really only know of one person who owns like a commercial taxidermy joint in Singapore. So it's not big at all there, and people are still quite like shocked when they know about taxidermy there. But yeah, anyway, I never got a call back. I never got anything, no leads, nothing for me.
Oh,
Sometimes I think about like 19-year-old me like just sobbing over the phone of
oh.
my dead hamster. It's like so like it's not embarrassing, but it's just like, oh my goodness. But basically I had to take things into my own hands, you know. And at that point in time, I was like, all right, I knew I had to like get her into the freezer and stuff like that. So I literally like buried her under like all my family's like Sunday shopping sort of deal. So my parents wouldn't know.
That's familiar. I may have done that with a river
Yep.
rat before. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. But yeah, so I guess I didn't want her to become like an experiment and a botched one at that.
Mm,
So I did a bit more research and then I read up and came across wet preservation. But again, at that time, and even perhaps now as well, like chemicals like formalin are pretty impossible to import into Singapore without the right licensing. So I did what was next best, basically, and injected her and kept her in 70% isopropyl alcohol. I managed to keep her for a while, actually, without my parents knowing, but they eventually found her. I think I was on holiday, on quite a long holiday with like a few, it must have been like a grad trip or something with a few friends. And, you know, when I came home and looked into that cabinet that I kept her in there, like she wasn't there anymore. And my parents were like, oh, we don't know what you're talking about. But I'm pretty sure
mm.
they threw her away. And, you know, it was a very traumatic time in my life. I think the only disappointing thing that was that my parents like didn't bother to like ask me like how did this come about? You know, they just like threw her away because it was like taboo.
Mm.
My hamster oatmeal is the reason why like I ended up here like doing what I do. Like the very basis of my work in taxidermy is like working with animals who were gone like way too soon and like giving them a second chance at life. And for me it's very cathartic to like, you know, name an animal after I receive them, I process them, and it sounds so like, yeah, it sounds so crazy, but like there is also like an unspoken bond that happens as I am processing them, and then, you know, eventually to like find them a forever home. Like that is like the whole process is very cathartic for me. Yeah, that's how it came about. Yeah.
Did you do training or you, I don't know what if there's like a profession or if there's hobby. Like I honestly, I don't know that much.
Yeah, I guess I would say I'm self-taught. And you know, like I mentioned just now, like I had already done some research in my adolescence, and but I guess like at that time, you know, being young, like I wasn't really like mature enough to understand like the protocols. Plus, like I couldn't access resources and materials, and all those things weren't like readily available to me. But then, you know, coming back to it in my mid-20s and being in Australia, like attempting taxidermy was much more like tangible and much more achievable. I am a visual learner, so I always go onto places like YouTube and Patreon or like just Instagram to see any sort of like taxidermy reels available. At the start of my journey, I actually did reach out to some local taxidermists to see if I could apprentice and work for free, but I got knocked back a lot. I guess it's because old school taxidermy is very much like tattooing, old boys club sort of vibe, but it's just so silly because like it's such an art form and a skill that, you know, requires mentoring. Maybe not requires mentoring, but you know, with a mentor you can get much further, I feel, in taxidermy. And it's just disappointing because yeah, getting like constantly knocked back. And then I had this one older guy say something to me like, oh, you know, you're a woman, you're gonna one day like have a family and not treat this very seriously anymore. And I'm like, what the
What
hell?
a D-bag.
Yeah, I know. Oh no, oh my God. I genuinely felt embarrassed for him like reading that reply back because I'm like, what? Can't make assumptions on people. Like, you know, I guess that's why I'm very like open on my Instagram with like the processes, and like most of my projects are like categorized on into highlights on my page because I just love like taking people on that ride with me. And it also does provide sort of like an educational thing for people to see. And I love creating community as well. So having people reply to certain stories and stuff like that, oh, like, what is this? What is that? How do you do this? How do you do that? Like, I like that sort of interaction with people. But yeah, so I guess the only course that I attended was with a local educational based institute, Rest in Pieces. I'm sure you might have heard of them before.
It sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're like one of the first local educational based institutes that was offering butterfly pinning classes, and like they had like tiered taxidermy system where it's like, you know, you first start out doing, I think, a chick or a rat. That's like their first sort of level, like entry level. And then you move on doing like rabbits and foxes. And I think there's also like a chicken or rooster class, something like that. Yeah, but it's a long story. But I basically had a bit of a mental breakdown in March of 22, when it came to my standing in taxidermy. I grew up in an environment that always required me to be perfect. And, naturally, like that takes a toll on you,
Oh, yeah.
when you're just starting out. Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to this. Yeah, because it's like, I just started this 2 seconds ago. Why am I already not perfect in it? Like, that was
Yeah.
my mindset. That was my mindset. Like, the moment I started doing taxidermy, I was like, why am I not perfect in it already? Yeah, but I was like terribly, terribly harsh on myself. Sometimes I think back on that time and I'm like, oh my gosh, if I spoke to someone else the way I spoke to myself, I would be cancelled. So basically what happened was the community like caught wind of my mental breakdown because I'm chronically online. Um and and like I like sharing my struggles online, and I think a lot of people, appreciate that and have reached out to me saying, thank you so much for being raw online, because it's like people just share the highlight reels, and I don't think that's right. I don't want people to think, oh, taxidermy is such a glorified thing. It's so easy to get into. Like, there are times where I have to take things apart and rebuild them, and I show that to all my followers because I'm like, it's not an easy job. But yeah, basically, about 20 people came together and they put like their hard earned money together and bought me a ticket to attend rabbit class.
That's wonderful. Oh,
I know every time I talk about this, I feel like I'm going to cry, but I just cannot put into words like how that situation made me feel. But I felt worthy of learning and making mistakes, and that was such a life-changing like mindset shift for me, because yeah, from then on, I spoke to myself in a much kinder way, and I let myself make mistakes, and I did not like unnecessarily stress myself over like little things that I couldn't control. But yeah, when I went to that rabbit class, it turned out that I was already like doing everything that was taught in that class and much more. And it was very reassuring because, like, again, without like a physical mentor, like I just never knew if I was going the right path. That class really quietened down that ugly voice in my head. And yeah, my mindset about like making mistakes and being not perfect has completely like changed now.
oh, that's awesome. I feel like I could use that.
Yeah. Oh my God. I tell you what, like it is so freeing to let go of that, because I feel like the moment that happened for me as well, like my taxidermy, just everything changed. And I just felt like before I was sort of like in a shell, like not experimenting with things that could potentially take my taxidermy to the next level. But after I sort of let that go, I was much more willing to like take on, for example, like I was doing rabbits for the longest time, but then I started doing cats and goats and this and that and
Oh, I
everything. And
remember your little tortoiseshell kitty that you had at
yeah,
she was
Bobby.
adorable.
Yeah, she's so adorable.
I don't know if I told you at the fair, but we have a giant fluffy tortoiseshell, and my husband and I have already planned to taxidermy her after she
Yeah,
dies
yeah,
because I
no,
don't think we can let
so
her
good.
go.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. I got one of my cats taxidermy. That's Georgie over there. Can you see her?
Oh, hi, Georgie.
Yeah, she's so cute.
You've mentioned wet prep and then entomology. And these are different types of taxidermy preparations. Can you talk a little about the different types?
Yeah, so I might start with taxidermy because I guess my bread and butter. Taxidermy, I think, is it the Latin word? Taxi is to move, and dermy is like skin. So it's taxidermy means to like move skin, usually like over a form. It includes like skinning an animal, making like an anatomically similar form to the carcass so that the skin will fit on perfectly. And then in taxidermy, we gotta do things like defleshing of the skin, which is taking as much fat, sinew, everything off the skin. And then we prep the skin with tanning solutions. And then when that's done, it goes over the form. Some clay work needs to be done around the face and other parts of the body just to make it look as alive as possible. And then that's all sewn up, goes through the whole like grooming process. I don't know if I told you when we were talking at the Dark Moon that like all my animals go through like a shampoo, a conditioner. Sometimes they've got like different like volumizing shampoos and stuff like that.
Fancy.
I know, I know. But yeah, that's taxidermy. And then, of course, there's entomology, which is papered specimens We put them in like a what we call a humidity chamber, which essentially is just a box with water under. I use like water and isopropyl mix, and then you sort of just leave it in there over a like a styrofoam board for it to relax the wings, and then you can pin them and everything like that, and adjust the legs and the joints and stuff like that. That's entomology. And then there's also wet preservation, which is injecting it with formalin, or next best solution is like a pure ethanol solution, and then soaking that in formalin for a period of time. There's actually a formula to calculate like the time needed for a specimen to be soaked in formalin. If I'm not wrong, it's like formalin penetrates the skin a centimeter every 24 hours. There's a whole formula where like you have to put in the weight of an animal, and then it'll sort of tell you the rough guide on how long it needs to stay in formalin for. But that's why, like, a lot of the wet preservation protocols will get you to inject all the muscles. Like, you have to be very thorough with injection so that it not only penetrates in, but also penetrates out, if that makes sense. And like prevents like rot. So that's wet preservation. And then with mummification, I guess there's two types of mummification. The first one is like man-made, and then the second one is natural. So man-made mummification in animal preservation methods is the step after wet preservation. So how I do my mummification is I wet preserve the specimen first, and when that's all done and chemicals are all leached from the specimen to make it safe for handling, then it comes out of the isopropyl alcohol and gets thoroughly dried out and dehydrated. That's man-made, or what I would call man-made. And in your episode with the Egyptians, there's like other herbs and stuff that they use in that process. Is that right?
Yeah, they had like natron used to dry things out, and like I think myrrh was one of them that they would stuff it with to just kind of
Mm-hmm.
reduce smells, but also get the last little bits of fat and things out of there.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of similar in that way, but with the animal one, we just purely use formalin because it changes the structure of like the proteins in the animal's body. So I guess it renders it like useless to bacteria. So bacteria can't eat and decompose the body, if that makes sense. And then there's natural mummification, which, requires like, sometimes plumbers will be like, oh, I found this thing under the house. Like, what is it? And it's like a really like dry, like jerky leather piece of looking thing. And that's like natural mummification that, requires like very specific environmental conditions to
Mm.
achieve. And they're very, very sought after, like very sought after.
Now I'm sad that I lost that rat because that was a natural mummy.
Oh, that will be so. Yeah, it's so hard to find. Like, I think somewhere in either Tasmania or maybe Western Australia, there's like this pub that has a mummified cat displayed in like the pub.
Oh, wow.
Because I think they found it on the property, and then they were like, all right, this is gonna be like our pub's mascot now.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. There was one of those in a church in Ireland that I was at once
Really?
where they were cleaning the organ and a cat had chased a rat into a pipe, and they found the rat and the cat
Oh
in the
my
pipe.
God. That that would actually be so cool to put up somewhere.
I think they kept it. I think it's
Oh
at a
my
display in the
God.
church. I seem to remember seeing it. I'll see if I can find the link for you later. It's
Yes,
awesome.
please. Yes, and then we've got articulation, which is the processing of bones, which is what I think you were mentioning, like the skull mounting.
Yeah, I'm much more familiar with that.
It's just like a carcass that gets like macerated, which is left in water, or like you can put it with beetles or ants, and then they eat the flesh away. And then you've got loose bones, and then you clean them and whiten them, and then fixing it all back together like a puzzle. And then you've also got oxidation, which I feel like is a cousin method to articulation. Oxidation is usually used on like small or young animals due to their bones not fully like fusing together yet. Oxidation in theory is a very like simple process because all you're using is ammonia and peroxide, but it is the most tedious thing ever. And it's crazy because I've done like quite a few oxidation projects, and Even with two, for example, I had these two puppies, two border collie puppies from the same litter, exactly the same size. I started the oxidation process at the same time. One still ended up breaking down much faster than the other one. And I used like the same chemicals, the same timing and everything. And yeah, it's just such a fickle process and needs a like very, very close monitoring. But yeah, I think those are the ones that I am most familiar with. I'm not too sure if there are other ones around. There could be, but yeah, these are the five or six that I personally do quite a bit with my practice.
Oxidization. That's the one I've never heard of. You said that the natural mummifications are sought after, but how do you obtain specimens for your other preparations?
Sorry, this is going to be so long. I'm so sorry. So yeah, before I speak on this at length, I just wanted to say that ethics is very personal. But my hot take is that if you think paper specimens can be ethically sourced, like you're completely wrong. I'll explain my hot take in a bit. So I might start off with explaining my sources for my animals first. It's 90 to 95% from like vets, clinics, proper breeders, not like backyard breeders. Like these breeders are people who supply to like children's farms or like kinders or like educational institutes. I get some of them from farmers as well, from foster carers, rescues, and I guess like people in general that not that they no longer want their pets, but you know, they've just kept their pets for so long that maybe the grief process is over and they just don't really know what to do with their pets anymore. And then I just take over the care for these pets. Well, I consider these sources ethical because none of these animals that come into my care from these sources, they were never like they were never meant to be harmed or killed for taxidermy. They're either like stillborn or failed to thrive or like have lived their lives to like whatever capacity that they did. I also consider it ethical because I pay like either the market rate or like above the market rate, really, for these animals to come into my care. Like, for example, for farmers, foster carers, and rescues, they typically use the money that I pay for these animals and then they put it back into their live animals. The other like 5 to 10% are from like two main sources. First one's like meat farms. These ones are pretty new to me, and I've only really used it for rabbits. And this is just me like wanting to have a look at the quality in terms of fur or like whether or not there's like lesser incidences of slit, which is if an animal has passed away and been like left out, not in the freezer, then you know, bacteria starts to eat at the hair follicles and literally fur comes off in like patches.
Yeah,
Have you experienced that before?
I have.
Oh no,
We
yeah,
had a
it's
rabbit. We went to like a pioneer farm or whatever, and they had these beautiful white rabbit skins. And I bought one because it was so soft. I've just pet it all the time, but it must not have been prepped properly because a couple of weeks later it just started to fall apart.
oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually, farms like that, I think what they usually do is this tanning method called the egg yolk method. And basically they just paint egg yolk on the skin and cure it. But yeah, it doesn't work. Nah. Um, but yeah, so anyway, like the meat farms, I wouldn't consider this ethical because they have been dispatched for like various reasons, either like consumption or in my case, taxidermy. But I definitely would consider this like a sustainable source. And then the second source is ferals from farmers or hunters. And this is like mainly with cats and foxes. So, for example, I don't know if Bagheera was still there when you came along, but he was this big black cat on my table. Did you catch him?
He was in like a pouncing, about to spring position. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Bagheera was a giant feral terrorizing a farm and its chickens. The farmer just shot him to protect his chickens. And, you know, this is where like the argument of ethics come along because if you saw it really plainly as a cat got shot, that's not ethical. But then if you think about how he wasn't shot for taxidermy, but for the purposes of keeping the farmer's chickens alive, then you could consider it as ethical. But then if you also consider that feral and outdoor cats are responsible for the decline in some of our native population, then the death of a feral or outdoor cat could be considered ethical. So It's a subject that's just very like,
It's a lot of gray areas in ethics in general. Like as a broad term, ethics seems really cut and dry, but then the more you ask questions, the more you're like,
yeah,
oh, is it though? Yeah.
absolutely. But hot take time. So basically, what I feel like is entirely not ethical is the way people source their papered specimens, paper insect specimens, and bats. Papered insect specimen are insects that have been purposely bred in the masses to end up getting papered for entomology art. The moment these insects either like emerge from their cocoons or like reach maturity, they're gassed, they're frozen, their lives are purposely ended to ensure like pristine A1 quality for entomology art. And A1 quality means there's no like lost scales, no loss of antennas, like no tears in the wings and stuff like that. So the moment they come out, their wings sort of come out and dry, they're caught and gassed. I think a lot of people are not aware of this because sometimes when I go on my ethics rants on my Instagram, people are like, so is there any way to get insects ethically? And I'm like, yeah, the only way to get insects ethically is, if you pick them up off the streets. For example, recently a follower of mine was like, hey, I live in Officer. Like sometimes throughout the years, there's either like heat waves or just like the natural like end of their cycle. And she's like, there's butterflies all around the floor, and she like collects them for me. And they wouldn't be in A1 pristine condition because they've already like flown around, knocked things over with their wings and stuff. People step on them and this and that and everything. They wouldn't be perfect. And that's really the only way, you can get it like ethically, I guess. I see a lot, and like I mean a lot of newer people who do entomology art or just bigger like delusional companies, I guess, claim that their specimens are ethically sourced when like I know who their suppliers are, and I have personally spoken to most major suppliers when I first started out, and I know for a fact that there is no way that their specimens can be ethically sourced. And I hear a lot of ridiculous things over the years, and like I know of someone who's said something like, oh, the atlas moths are like from a special supplier that like takes really good care of them, and the summer where they are is so like hot and it's extra special and helps the moths to really like fatten up and get really big. I just think like, the desperation to convince people of anything but what really happens is like kind of sad. What makes me angry is that these people use these two words, ethically sourced, as a buzzword to like generate more sales, instill more confidence in buyers that, they don't have to be guilty for indulging in entomology art. And like I said, when people reach out to me to get educated about this topic, they leave the conversation like clearer. And I cannot tell you how many like buyers have been duped into believing that their butterflies have been sipping like Mai Tais at the beach, before like willingly getting gas or something. While I did start by saying that, ethics is personal, there is no way that anyone could think that insects that are purposely bred in the masses and then get killed for art is ethical. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know like they're just insects and their lifespans are not long anyway after they mature, but still like they don't get to like live that life till the end, and most of them just get gassed and sent off to people like me to do art with. Anyway, now for the even more depressing topic, that's an ethics. Yeah, kin to people trying to convince others that their insects are ethically sourced. This same thing happens with bats, but so much worse. With insects, it's slightly less dire because, after all, they're like bred in the masses. And recently, a big population of insect farms have like come out to, I guess, pledge their commitment towards sustainability, where they like release about half the population back into their natural habitats. But see, the thing is, again, like, unless I am there to see it,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even tell people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even I have never, in my 3 years of doing this, ever claimed that my stuff is ethically sourced, unless that it's animals. Animals, I'm very, very strict on that. Even like breeders and stuff, I personally go and visit and have a look at their facilities before committing. But, with the insects, it's like there could be a farm in like Indonesia. Not everyone will have the resources to go out there and see it for themselves. So I've never claimed that, my entomology art is ethical or sustainable because people can say what they want to, again, instill that confidence in you to buy their stuff. But also, insects have like a much quicker lifespan. So it's easier to recuperate from numbers if it's low. But with bats, they are always, 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 always poached from the wild. And conservation work has suggested that many, many species of bats that are rampant in the curiosities and oddities world, such as the painted woolly bat. So that's the bat that usually has its wings outstretched because it's like orange and black in color. If we as a community continue to allow for the trading of these bats, it's extremely terrible. They're caught and gassed. They're literally like suffocated and dried. And like that's why in most of these bat pieces, their mouths are always open because the last thing they're doing is gasping for air. Yeah, I know it's terrible, isn't it? It's really,
It
really terrible.
is.
Oh,
Oh,
it's so terrible. And like some things you hear some people say about why they continue to supply bats is just atrocious. Like it's a good like money maker or whatever. Like oh my God, like we've all seen history and how like the obliteration of a single species can cause crazy ripple effects for our ecosystem. And this is going to happen again if people are not careful, basically. It's also such an insult when people call it taxidermy because it's not taxidermy. They're just like kind of mummified and dried in that position.
oof.
And yeah, it's just terrible. The loss of a single species of such an important animal is definitely going to guarantee like a breakdown of our ecosystem. Me and some of my really close friends in the industry have sort of reached out to people saying like, hey, just letting you know this is what happens with the bat trade. Like, are you willing to stop selling bats in your store? And a lot of people are like, nah, they make me really good money because like a bat you get from like an Indonesian supplier is maybe like max 40 Australian dollars. People sell it for 300 Australian dollars just like that in a frame. So
I'm getting mad. My God. Oh,
so angry. I know, me too. Oh gosh, yeah.
I love bats. I think they're adorable. That hurts. And that
Oh, it's crazy. It's so bad,
they say that's
and
good money, but then they don't actually pay that much for the life of this poor bat. And it's, oh,
exactly. Oh, it's terrible. And like in Australia, like yeah, we'll see bats around whatever, but like for example, this bat that I was talking about, the painted woolly bat, you don't see that around. A lot of these dried bats are from Indonesia, sort of like more third world countries. So there's a whole thing about people they're just trying to make a living, but it can't be justified. Like it cannot be justified, in my opinion, at least. People are listening in, like, please do not support the bat trade. I know this one lady, I think she's in Adelaide. She does faux bat taxidermy. So it's actually a rat, and then she does like the wings with different material.
oh,
So
interesting.
it does look like a bat. A lot of people as well have recently I started doing paper bats or like just bats using like other materials. So I mean people are getting it, but then there's also a population of people that are just I don't even know what the word is to describe these people, but like yeah, it pisses me off so bad.
Yeah. Ugh,
Yeah.
that makes me sad.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
On a happier note, I'm not sure if this one was with you at Dark Moon, but I saw a picture of it on your Instagram of the mummified and then mossified quail.
Oh yes, yes.
How did
Yes.
you do that one? It looks kind of like it's partially skeletal and covered in moss. It's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. The truth is that it was not what I initially envisioned it to be. I always say to people, like in the art taxidermy world, not everything ends up being the way I want it to be, unfortunately. The Japanese quail in that piece, was meant to be like my first bird taxidermy experiment. Now, I guess most people wouldn't know, but birds have paper, paper thin skin. I started with an animal that was quite advanced, and that being the rabbits, they've got really thin skin as well. But like birds are a whole new level. Like you can look at the skin, and the skin will start to like just disintegrate right in front of you. And yeah, as soon as I skinned it, I knew it was over.
Oh
I was like,
no.
shit. And then I decided, all right, I'll preserve it via the oxidation method. But then halfway through, I was like, oh, I really want to like make an open frame piece. And I guess the thing with the open frame pieces is that it's not protected by glass. So most of the project needs to be like made of artificial or like non-organic material so it wouldn't perish in the elements, if that makes sense. I would say I specialize in making habitats and groundwork out of completely non-organic material. So I thought that's going to be perfect to make a piece like that. And I guess my inspiration behind it was I wanted to like make something that symbolized the foreverness of a resting place. And I wanted my quail to look really mummified, like it had been there for a long time and is coming back, like becoming one with earth again. I guess that's what you're seeing, like the mud around it and the moss growing all around it and stuff like that.
It's like it's coming up out of the moss. And I loved that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so funny. The interesting thing behind it as well is, you like I interpret it as one way, and then someone else will look at it like yourself and connect it with your own memories. And like the person who bought it was actually Ange, who made the Dark Moon Fair. She was like, "Oh my God, this reminds me so much of Jurassic Park," and she loves Jurassic Park, so she was like, "I need it."
Awesome. Do you sell your pieces or is it more kind of like, do you mostly do fairs or do you sell online? And if so, where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram. That's where I'm like most chronically online.
Odd.taxidermy, right?
That's right. And yeah, I just post a lot on there because, like I was saying, I like to be very open with the stuff that's going on with the taxidermy things. I am mostly commissions based. Actually, this is my first year coming out to sell things at the Dark Moon Fair. I do occasionally have pieces available, but yeah, mostly it's commissions or selling at the fair.
So guys, come to the Dark Moon Fair.
I think the next one is in January. She's got a new venue this time that's a bit bigger in Mooney Valley.
Mooney Valley Racing Club.
Where they hold events. But yeah, I mean, go on to the Dark Moon Fair page. It's all, I think the details have been put out already.
Well, thank you again. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much. Like, genuinely, thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
The Morbid Curiosity podcast is produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic, you can do so on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast, on Twitter at Morbid Podcast, and on our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. If you like the podcast, please share it with your friends and on social media. And please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. This helps the MCP reach new listeners and expand this wonderfully creepy community. Thank you to everyone who has already done so. Because of you, the listeners, our creepy community is growing strong. The MCP has joined the Straight Up Strange podcast network, which hosts true crime, paranormal, history, science, folklore, and other enigmatic podcasts. Nothing is off limits when you enter the world of Straight Up Strange. The MCP is also part of the Belfry Podcast Network, a haven for goth culture, featuring podcasts, blogs, and videos, all catering to the darker side of life. If you'd like to support the MCP, you can give one-time donations on our website. Also on our website are links to all our social media, a list of episodes, and our mailing address. We also have an Amazon wishlist at bit.ly/morbidwishlist. That's bit.ly/morbidwishlist. Any purchases from this list are greatly appreciated. We are eternally grateful for your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thanks for listening.